Hi, I'm Michael Davies and welcome to this tutorial in Maya. This particular tutorial is going to be on character rigging, and I'm going to start just by showing you a couple of rigs and actually just explore some of the principles of actually what character rigs are and what they can do and how we can actually start to make some controls for animators to start to pose and position characters. So to start off with, we'll look at this one here. So this is a very basic bipedal character. And what you'll tend to find with a lot of character rigs is that there's no particular one way in which a rig will look. I will show you two examples of this particular character. This one is one where I've got a center of gravity control. I can move the entire model around. If I was to move his arm down, I can kind of start to position him. I've got on this particular control here some controls where I'm able to bend his fingers if I was to select those. Like that. Then grab the pink as well so it doesn't look so weird. You can start to make his fingers open and close like that. Okay, we've got a pull vector control. And we'll go through how to create some of these in a moment, but the thing is, they're all the way in which character rigs are supposed to work is they're supposed to be very user friendly, and animators will be spending hours posing and positioning these to make their animations, so it needs to be very simple and there's no point making them super complicated so that the animator doesn't understand what any of these controls do. Okay, and if we were to move some of the torso, we can see how his body moves. What we've also got here is something called an IKFK switch, where we can go from moving his hands and arms using movement, and if I was to select this control, we've got IKFK blend on the left arm. If I move that over, it now blends, the controls change, so now these are all rotational and I can pose his arm the same way using that control. Okay, and the same with the head, and we've got control here so we can open and close his mouth. Okay, so again, this is a very flexible rig in that we can start to rotate him around, scale him up and down to maybe the size of our scene. So this is, again, although I will refer to this as quite a simple rig, it's simple in the fact that the controls don't allow you to do many advanced functions, and I'll show you maybe something else that's driven into this as well. We've got something called a blend shape, which is, if we would go to Windows, Animation Editors, Shape Editor, we've got all of these blend shapes, and these are just nodes that are plugged into this particular character rig that allow us. That one there is making this eye blink. We can do one for the other eye. We've got one here, if we pull these over, see the names of these. We've got a hardened blink, which is just the same sort of blink but just with a little bit more eyebrow and cheek being pushed into that as well. Okay, so more of a wink and a proper hard blink there. So all of these blend shapes control the mouth. So as I said, when I mentioned that this is a simple rig, it's just because it just does the basic functionality that you would expect a bipedal character to be able to do. So if we compare this to, if I just close that one, got this one here, which is a slightly more complex version of the same rig. Now you can see we still have this functionality of being able to move the arms. This doesn't change. What I've got here though is an option. If you can see, when I pull this particular IK control further, it will lock. And what we can do on this one, we've got this stretch, which if we turn on, now enables us to be able to stretch these joints and stretch him and pose him. We can start to move his knee out and add a lot more bend and rotation with the way in which his body works. Okay, so again, some quite big deformations that we're able to make with this one here. And if I was to grab this particular control, we're able to move his body, as well as the center of gravity control, where we can still move everything. But with this particular control, where I'm able to stretch and move around his body, something that's quite interesting about this particular movement is that at the moment, if he was to stretch, you would expect to see kind of his body starts to kind of squeeze in to maintain that volume. And what we have here on this particular control is a volume. If we turn that on, now when this moves down, he'll actually get thinner, and when you push him up, he gets fatter. So we've got lots kind of being driven here that will help him maintain volume as he's kind of squashing around and things like that. We've also got a control here which enables you to do the same to his head. We can start to turn on volume controls as well on the neck, so that when his neck goes up, it does start to get thinner. And it's all because of all the different things that are kind of driven inside of this particular model. Okay, so again, regardless of actually the model itself, depending on what it's going to be used for, you will have to make different controls. And this is why character rigging is such a broad subject. It's because no two rigs are usually exactly the same, unless there may be kind of background characters that are going to not be, maybe not your hero characters. So they will have to be, there's no point making them as complex as the hero characters, as that maybe they're just going to be walking in the background or anything like that. These would be much more like that very first version of the rig that I showed you. Okay, so with that in mind, again, I'm just going to close that one as well. So we've got a much more complex character rig, and the thing is, one thing about this is that when people look at a rig like this, they get a little bit scared about kind of what all of these controls are doing. But if you understand the principles of actually what a control is and actually how we manipulate character rigs, this becomes not very scary at all. The thing with this is that it actually becomes quite simple. The thing that will kind of baffle some people is just how we start with something like this, and it's all about just analysing what the model should be able to do. So again, just like before, we've got this particular character rig where if you move the arm moves, and it's not too dissimilar to what I was doing before. And it's because it's not actually underneath this, that control's doing exactly the same thing. The only thing with this now is that I've got all these other controls that their movements are dependent on the movement of this, so it's just how you start linking these. But you tend to find that most controls, say for example if we come in at the foot here, work in very much the same way. So we've got the foot control there. Some people do the actual controls on the toes or the feet or the fingers, so you're actually able to pose them, or they add it to this one here, and you can see here that I have a roll, which again enables some kind of additional kind of movement there as well. We've got the toe, which enables you to just wiggle the toes. And again, this does have a stretchy rig as well, so you can start to kind of put in some of those values to start to get that. And again, if you imagine that your neck is almost like the torso in the first one, it's just being able to kind of pose this particular character around with a joint chain going up the neck. So I'm going to show you a couple of principles of how maybe we would actually start with a character like this, but thing is, what we need to do is at first is think about what this character rig needs to be able to do. So any control that we make will usually, as an absolute minimum, translate, rotate or scale a part of the object. And to be honest, we don't even really use scale that often either. It's mainly the movement and rotation of particular parts of a model. You can see with all of these, that's a movement, and I probably have a rotation here as well, so I can start to move it around. These ones here, kind of rotational, where I can start to kind of stretch out parts of the wings as well. I'm sure we could start to scale these, but again, you really wouldn't usually do much to those. Okay, so again, most of these controls, I mean this one's a particularly flexible rig in that we're able to kind of scale it up and move it around. We can start to stretch out parts of the neck, obviously stretching the texture in certain cases as well. So it's usually the case as well that we start to lock off, and especially with this one, where we don't have any translation. This is just a rotational and scale joint, so that it means that an animator doesn't accidentally move the character in a way that maybe it shouldn't. Again, you don't try to limit the animator very much when you actually are posing the character, but it's just very helpful. It just means there's kind of a lot less things that can go wrong with a particular character rig. Okay, so that in mind, I'm going to show you, if I was to just close this one, how to create this. Now, obviously it doesn't look as impressive as the other rigs, but actually creating this particular character rig is just as important than pretty much any other part of a character rig, because with this one, again, as I mentioned before, if we were to start to move him around, we've got these controls here which enable us to start to move the foot, but we've also on the heel here got a control that enables us to do the switch between IK and FK, so then the movement here can be rotational, and then again switching back to the IK workflow. Okay, now this one also has a squash and stretch rig as well. I'm not going to show you kind of how to approach that, but certainly if you wanted to take your rigs further, you could start to look into how to actually make these kind of additional controls. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to start with just a new scene. So just going to go new scene, and no point saving there, and just going to turn on anti-aliasing, just so it makes my scene look very nice and my controls won't look weird at kind of particular points. So starting off with this, we need a model. Now I'm going to just show you how to model a basic foot, very simply, very low poly to start off with. So I'm going to grab the bottom vertices and snap these to the grid. So hit W and just move these up. I'm just going to hold X, so those snap just to that line. And then I'm going to do the same, just drag these and just pull those up. Okay, so if I was to pull out kind of the foot there, and then just going to hit extrude again to pull that up, actually we'll make kind of a bit more of a kind of an ankle there. Okay, and when at the top, another extrusion just for the top of the leg. And I'm just going to maybe make that's quite thin. I'm going to check the proportions in a moment, but that could be a decent start. Okay, so now I'm just going to put in some more divisions. So one thing at this point, when you're actually evaluating the model, is that you've got to decide whether the model is actually good enough for to be rigged. Actually has the detail that it needs to be able to make the deformations that it should be able to make. And this is a conversation that hopefully you are having with the character modeler, and hopefully early on as well. It's horrible for a character modeler to have to kind of make significant changes to a model just because perhaps the animator or supervisor wasn't very clear on all the things that the particular model was supposed to be able to do. That has happened to pretty much everyone I know. It's quite a common thing, so again, if you can avoid it, that's great. But again, it's just all about communication at that point. So one thing here, I've got divisions at the knee, I've got divisions around the ankle, and I've got divisions around the toes. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to smooth this, so that I'm going to have a lot of kind of volume around those areas because I have the divisions to actually make those deformations. Notice that it lost my knee there, so I'm just going to undo that and put in a couple more divisions around the knee so that I keep that bends to the leg, which is very nice. And then I'm just going to just have a bit more of a foot there, so just turning off soft select by pushing B. I'm just going to pull that up a bit. Okay, maybe a bit more just at the top of the foot. Okay, something like that. And if I was being particularly kind of accurate with this, I'd maybe push that just to one side. So I've got kind of the natural curve of the foot going on there. Okay, so with that in mind, what I do is just even out some of these divisions, so just bring in some edge loops, so just using the multi-cut tool here to put those in. But base of the foot's nice and flat. I think maybe the front is just a little bit too flat there. So I'm just going to pull those just out a bit further. Certainly that line there could definitely be pushed out a bit just to make that rounder at the front. Okay, so at this point, just gonna smooth that again so that I've got lots of nice divisions. Great. Okay, so one thing that maybe would happen at this point is that you'd maybe delete any additional kind of edge loops that you wouldn't need, but I'm quite happy with that. I'm just going to move this back. Okay, so once you have a model like this, best thing you can do is save. I'm just going to save this to my desktop very quickly, so save as. And if I was to just find where I've got my desktop, there's my H drive, there we go. And I'm just going to put that there. I'm just going to put this leg rig. Okay, I recommend saving often because Maya crashes. I think we've all been in that situation where you've got so far of a project and haven't saved. Anyway, so if I go to look at this now, I've got transforms, I've got all of these different inputs, and this is not a very clean model to start with. So what we'd do is freeze our transformations, and we can get to that as well under modify freeze transformations, but we'd also want to delete our history, so all of this, because this is all basically nodes that actually exist with the creation of this model, and it can start to conflict with things that we might want to do later on. So anyway, so we can fix that. We can go to so edit, delete all by type, and then history. So this is a clean model, and now I'm just going to rename this leg underscore, and pick a naming convention for that. Geo, I just do underscore geo, and we'll talk about making this nice and organized later on. And here we are. So we're going to start with this by actually making a joint chain from the hip, knee, ankle, the ball of the foot, and then also the toes there as well. So we're going to go just into the side view, and the reason why we do this is just because then it will snap down this line of symmetry here. Sorry, do that there. And I'm just going to go into rigging, and pretty much everything I'm going to be doing here is under these two rigging tabs. So if you're within that at this point, you're pretty much set up for what I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to go to the very first one here, the joints tool. And the way which this works, I'm just going to move to the side here and show you this. If I was to draw some joints, they're all connected to each other. Let's do something funky like that. I'm just going to hit enter to finish my joint chain. And look at this in my 3D view. So the way in which this works is that we have a couple of things. We have joints and we have bones, and bones are these arrows that point down to the next joint in the chain. And what this essentially is what we would think of as a parenting system. So this joint is parented to this joint, which is parented to this joint, which is parented to this joint. So if I wanted to rotate this, the whole thing moves, but as I go down the chain, the actual selection becomes more and more defined. Okay, and this one joint that we can select that selects the entire chain is something we called a root joint. At any point we can change that. We can go to skeleton, and there's an option here called reroute skeleton, which now means that it rotates from there, and we've got options here to move that one on its own and that one independently. Depending on the model that you choose, this root joint would be in maybe different places. So anyway, that is how this works. So I'm going to start with this, with the joint tool. I've just made the locator by accident as well. This is why you shouldn't just click randomly on your scene. Let's just delete that. There we go. So root joint, I'm just going to click here, here, the ankle, the ball, the toe. Now we can't see this joint chain through the actual model, and we can change that. There's a little icon just here which is called X-ray joints. If we select that, now we can see that going through, and if we go on to shading, you can actually turn it on there as well. Okay, but that's only in that view. You can see that we can't see through it in all the other views, so again, just click that in all the views so that now we can see that. So this is actually pretty close to actually having kind of the skeleton, the basic skeleton, actually already done. One thing that I want to point out about this is something called orientation. Now if I zoom in on that very top joint there, you can see that inside that joint we've got this axis. We've got the Z, which is blue, Y, which is green, and X, which is in going down the joint chain. You can see that that is going down the joint chain pretty much everywhere. Okay, apart from right at the end. Now what happens when you actually draw a joint, if I just go back into my side view and draw this out just here, is when you create a joint you can see it's orientated a certain way, but the second you make another joint and let go, this joint reorientates, and I'm going to do that again. So you can see if I was to put that here, it reorientates to that direction. Now depending on what you're making, say for example if you're making a hand and you wanted all of the fingers to orient a certain way, when you rotate it, actually I'm going to make this just a little bit more complicated, so just a couple more clicks there. And what we can do, if I was to select these joints, if the orientation for these is the same, I should get a nice curl of the joints. Now if the orientation is different, say for example all of these aren't the Y rotation, you can see the Y rotation is this way, then you'll start to get these kind of starting to deform and warp in different areas. So just before you're finished with a particular joint chain, just make sure the orientations are correct. Now we're not going to be rotating this end joint in our chain, so technically you don't have to change it. But again, it's just good practice just to bear that in mind. So I'm actually going to add another joint to this. So again, just pointing that out. If I zoom in on that just by pushing F, we can see on all the other joints X is to the next joint, but then on this one X is going to the side. So I'm just going to create another joint, and you can do that just by selecting a joint tool and just making sure you select it and then draw another one. And you can see that's reoriented and doesn't look like it's moved much, but if I hit delete, now we can see that that is now pointing in the right direction. So you don't have to keep that new joint that you've just made, but it just means that it just sets this up. Okay, so before we're finished with this, I'm actually going to just lower this down, and it's about ready to actually be bound to the skin, sorry, bound to the geometry, and just double checking that everything's right there. That's all looking good. Okay, so one thing to double check just before we do the binding is that we rename these. So this one will be hip underscore JNT 01. Okay, so JNT is going to be my naming convention for any joints that I have in the scene. This one will be the knee underscore JNT 01. The ankle underscore JNT 01. Underscore JNT 01. And then finally the end of the toes, I'm just going to put this end toes underscore JNT 01. And the reason why we do the 01 is if we're going to duplicate this in our scene at any point, it will automatically rename them as 02. And that can be very kind of helpful to actually know exactly what a particular model in your scene is doing at a particular point. It just means when we actually look at this, because already if I was to hold shift and click that, this is starting to get a little bit more detailed, and that's even before we've actually added any kind of the IK-FK joints or any of the controls. So again, as organised as you can be with this is going to help you out quite a bit. Okay, so at that point, save, always helps. And then what I can do is select the foot, select the joints that I want to skin. Again, I'm not going to add any influence just to that end joint. I'm just going to double click on my skinning options, and I'm just going to reset these, and I'm just going to use the default options for this because it's quite a simple character. Maybe it is worth going through what all these different options do, but as I said, for this particular with this particular character, and this is still a character, I'm just going to just hit apply. Okay. So the next step of this, again after we save, is to make sure that it's worked. So we can move that. The knee is bending very nicely. The ankle is bending okay, but we're kind of getting an arc there, so we can fix that in a moment. And look at the joint here, and that's actually deforming quite a lot more of the bottom. I wouldn't want the bottom to intersect with the floor, so we can fix that as well. And obviously just make sure the root joint's working as well. That's fine. So again, you just want to make sure that at every point that your rotation for all of these joints is always 0. And that just means that no matter what I do, I can, like, as I'm testing this, say for example I'm moving this, seeing how flexible the rig particularly is. If I ever want to put this back, I can select the top joint, the root joint, and then you can go to select hierarchy, which selects every joint in the chain. And even though all of these look like they're set to 0, if I actually put in a value of 0, the leg will snap back. Okay, because that, again, that's not just doing it for the toes, which is what it says is selected here, it's doing it for all the joints in the chain. Okay, so now what I can do is change how particular joints are affecting the model. So I said that one's working fine, this one's working fine, but it was the ankle and certainly the ball joint here affecting the toes that I want to affect. So this is with a tool that we call the Paint Skin Weights tool, and you can find this just by holding down the right mouse button and going to that there. And what we see within this interface, if we were to just zoom out, is the hip, the knee, the ankle, the ball, and actually for some reason it did add the toes. I know why that did that, and that's fine. We can actually take away that as well. Small mistake on my part, I did this bind to joint hierarchy, not selected joints, and that just joint hierarchy just did it to all the joints, when actually I just wanted it to be on the ones I had selected. Never mind, small problem there. But what I can do is just paint out that, and in this case I can just go to replace with end toe selected, replace, and a value of 0. So when I flood this, it takes away all of that weighting on the toes, and it'll actually add it down to the ball joint here. So if I was to right click on this, hold it down, and go to select influence, we switch to that. And this is where you can see we've got a lot more influence underneath the foot. So one thing that I like to do with this when I'm kind of figuring out how this would work is I'll actually bend the foot, and you can see where it's influencing where it shouldn't be. And then I can go to the Paint Skin Weights tool. I'm going to do replace again with a value of 0 because I'm going to be taking away some influence. And I'm just going to paint that out. So I can come across here. Just make sure there's none on the ankle there. And just underneath the foot, you can see that now it's not it is still intersecting the floor just a little bit, just there. Just take that out. Okay, so I'm going to just go switch to smooth, just because I don't like these particular lines. There we go. So just smooth out that particular weighting a little bit. There we go. So that's now moving nicely. So I can put that back down to being a rotation of 0. And then at the ankle here, I'm just going to check that. Okay, so it's because part of this must be weighted with the knee. So I can go to Paint Skin Weights tool, select influence, and there you can see that the colour there is a little bit damper. So I'm going to go to replace with a full value, so I'm adding a full weighting here. I'm just going to paint that in. You can see how much that's now popping out. Again, a bit more on the bottom of the foot there as well. Just so those vertices are actually being affected. And then again with a bit of smooth just on the top there, so it just maintains its shape a bit more. Maybe a bit more there as well. Again, all the smooth is doing is just spreading around that weighting. Okay, that looks pretty nice. So now I can put that back to 0. So just to double check that is working, so if I was to come here, that's now not caving down underneath, and if I was to move that down, I'm maintaining the volume at the hill. Perfect. And again, the knee didn't need any work. And if you did want to work on this a little bit, you can maybe make it so it maintains that volume a bit more. So again, go onto that joint, so over at select influence, and that would just be by removing some of the influence on the back of the leg. So I can go there, and I don't want to flood. Okay, and then I'm just going to push B to make my brush smaller and just drag there, and just paint out just a little bit of that at the back, and then again just a little bit more smooth there. So now it pinches more at a kind of definitive there. Okay, just smooth this out a bit more. Perfect. Okay, I think it's just a little bit more smoothing there. Perfect. Okay, so although this is a very simple model, that is now kind of fully weighted, so that's really nice. Okay, so now with the next step of this, we now have a full rig that we could perhaps move around. We can start to kind of rotate it, we can deform it in any way we want. So the binding is completely done now. Obviously in the more complex character rig, you would actually do this for every single joint. Now I can't stress enough that when you are binding your joint chain to your mesh, really spend time looking at every single joint and just making sure that the joints that shouldn't be affecting anything aren't affecting anything, and then the joints that are affecting pieces of the geometry are actually working perfectly. Just because it's very tedious to have to keep going back to this particular step, it's worth spending the time on it and getting it over and done with. But as I said, be very analytical and be very honest with this particular step. If something's not working, figure out why and really keep going until it is fixed. Okay, so now this is done, again, Control S, nice save there to make sure that if this does crash, it's been pretty good so far, but it might crash. Anyway, so if I was to now do to set up the IKFK, I'm actually going to make a couple of duplications to this. Now you're going to start to see how quick these joints are going to start to get a bit more complex. So I'm just going to push Control D twice. Okay, you can see there that now I've got 3 joint chains, but the things about these particular joint chains is that they are not connected. Okay, these duplicates have no binding weighting attached to them whatsoever. Okay, so we're going to have one which is going to be for IK, one that's going to be for FK, and we use these as drivers. So we plug in these attributes to actually drive the bind rig. So anyway, so we'll go back to that. And the thing is, for the IKFK, we're only driving the hip and the knee, and you can drive the ankle if you want. There's a couple of ways of which you can do that, and I think I'm just going to... Actually, I will drive the ankle as well, so I'll tell you what we'll do. So we'll just delete all the ankle, sorry, up to the ankle, so delete the toes and the ball joints on the 2 different chains. Now, these don't seem to make sense at the moment, so what I'm going to do is just select those joints and just come under Modify, add a prefix name. I'm just going to call these bind underscore, and what that does is just make sure that I know that these are the binds. I'm going to do the same for these. So again, modify prefix names, and I'm going to call these IK underscore, and the same for these, modify prefix names, FK underscore. Okay, so again, don't want that to be 02, I want these to be 01. Okay, perfect. So again, the logic being at the moment is that when we're in IK mode, it will follow this joint chain. When it's in FK mode, it will follow this joint chain. Okay, so I think first things first, what we can do is actually start to set up some controls for these. So for IK, so we always know we're in IK mode, I'm just going to hide FK, I'm going to hide the geometry and hide the bind. I'm just going to create an IK handle. So this node just here, which is what IK stands for, inverse kinematics, which means I've just selected from the hip joint to the ankle, so that when I move this, now it's moving the joint chain in IK mode. So this will help us when we're actually wanting to make sure this is working. So I'm just going to put this leg underscore IK01. So we know that, and just at the end of that, if we go to the IK, we've got the effector. I'm just going to put that as the same name as this, but instead of being IK, it'll be EFF for end effector. Again, it doesn't matter how you name these, it's just so if you keep to a particular naming convention, you can start searching for particular objects, and it just makes everything so much easier. Okay, so I've got my IK handle here, and I can start to work, again, just working with my IK joint chain there. So what I can do now is actually start to connect these up to the bind. Sorry, just unhide these to this bind joint chain. And the way we do this is we need a node that actually switches between IK and FK for us. And we can do this in the node editor. So this is where we can start to make these connections. So I'm just going to go to Windows, and then if I was to go to node editor, it's just opened it on my other screen, so just drag that in. There we go. Okay, so at the moment I've only got my hip joint there, and I don't want just my hip joint, I want all of these, so I need these three, and I can middle mouse drag those in. And if I was to do those for the same for IK and the same for FK. Okay, so I'm just going to minimize my outline for the moment and pull these back in. So the way in which this works is that we've got our hip, so IK hip, and these will plug into the bind hip. Okay, IK hip, FK hip. So the rotation of the hip will be dependent on the rotation of the IK and FK. So we need a node here, which is the interpolation. So one thing that's going to kind of help me out with this, if I push P on these, you can see a little icon comes up, which pins these in place. Now you're going to see some crazy things happen to the other ones, which I'm not going to pin. But pinning those in place really helps out. So I'm going to make a new node just by pushing Tab, and just type in blend. And there's something here called blend colors, and it creates a new node. And the way in which this works, if I just open up the attribute editor to show you this, so you've got color 1 and color 2 and the blender. So if you're in here, you're seeing one more than the other. If you go this all the way to the other one, you are blending between the ways in which these colors work, and at the moment they are literally colors, but I don't want them to be colours, I want them to be the rotation values for these. Now because they're colours, they have 3 inputs, as in R, G and B. So if I was to click on that, I've got HSV, RGB, these have 3 inputs, so it means that it can convert over. So I'm going to rename this, I'm just going to call this IKFK hip underscore blend 01. Okay, So that's going to be my, and again I'm going to pin that, so push P, and then I'm going to plug in the IK, rotate into colour 1, and you can see all of those start to jump around. Always something that really annoys me about node editor. Hopefully they kind of work on that a bit. But what happens when I plug those in, you can see them here, you've got these unit conversion nodes, and what these do, these convert it from rotation to colour. Doesn't matter about that, because then we can go to the output, and output rotation to that, and again it does another unit conversion, which is now snapped all the way over here. But the point being that now these are actually rotating and going back from RGB values to actual rotational values. Again, so just how it understands that conversion, so I'm just going to push P on these unit conversions so they don't bounce around like everything else did. And now what I can do, now I'm finished with those, is close this. So unit conversion, try and make this look pretty, unit conversion, hip. So to test this worked, I'm going to select that, and I'm just going to actually grab my IK handle and pull that round. Now you can see that at this point it is following the IK, and then we've got the FK here. And now if we was to go back to the node editor and select the blend and look at that, when we blend this back down, you can see it goes from being IK mode to FK. There we go. So now we have to repeat that process for the other joints. Okay, so to do that, again, I'm just going to leave that, doesn't matter at what now. I'm going to open up my node editor again, close that, because that one's done. But again, I'm just going to duplicate that a couple of times, because I'm going to need these. I'm just again going to pin them so they stay where they are. And again, this one is going to be the one for the knee. And then this one is going to be the one for the ankle. Okay, perfect. Okay, so again, these are both pinned. I'm going to come back to the ankle in a moment, but I may as well start with the knee. So that is the bind to the knee, so that needs to go on the other side, and somewhere, there we go, just down here, we've got the IK and FK. So one thing about this is that what you want to do is just make sure that if you're plugging in IK into color 1, that you just stick with it. It doesn't matter whether you plug IK into color 1 or FK into color 1. You just want to make that consistent throughout, and that'll make a bit more sense in a moment when we actually create control, which will actually control all of these blend nodes. So again, pin these, and actually I'm just going to show you what happens if you don't pin them, because then you can understand the pain of not pinning them. If you was to click rotate and nothing else is pinned apart from that, if I go to color, that happens, and it, again, is frustrating. There's no kind of reason why they should do that, but they do. So do just make sure you're pinning them, otherwise they do just jump around, and it becomes very difficult to just put them back to a kind of a way in which they actually make sense. There we go. Sorry. So just pushing P there for pin to actually have it so that these don't jump around like crazies. Anyway, so there we go, and we've got our unit conversion, which is for some reason jumped all over there. Push P, so that has now worked. So again, color 1, color 2, IK, output into the rotate there, and pin that as well. There we go. So that's that one done. We can close these down. I like closing them down so that I know that they're done. So that's one more. So that's the knee, IK, knee, FK. Perfect. So that's how that looks. So lastly, we can do this again. So the bind ankle, IK, FK into a blend. Again, you can select all of these and pin them, and open this up. like that. And again, IK into colour 1, FK into colour 2. It didn't actually do that. Let's do that again. There we go. Got these unit conversions, which I'm now just going to grab and pin so they behave, and then output into rotation and pull that back. Pin. Okay, so that's the blend now working for all of these. Okay, so what I want at the moment is a control which enables me in our scene to blend between these 3 blend nodes. So I'm just going to show you those. So that was the ankle, that was the knee. I'm just going to pull these down so that they are completely out of the way. I've also got that one there, which was the one for the hip. So hip, knee, ankle. So I said when it's in IK mode, all of these need to be on 1. When it's on FK mode, all of these need to be on 0. So I'm going to create a control, and this is the first control that we've made here, which is just going to be for the blend. And I like doing these just with the basic NURBS. I don't usually make them too complex, but I'll show you a couple of more complex controls in a moment. So I'm just going to put this, just something that appears on the ankle. So what I'm going to do, just bring back my geometry. So Shift H to bring that back, because I hid it, just so that I know that it's something that I'm always going to be able to see. And I'm going to make it quite a small little node there. And that's perfect. So one thing with this is I may as well freeze the transformations. So freeze transformations. I'm going to turn off my geometry a couple more times throughout this. So I'm just going to create a new display layer and just rename that Geo layer, just so that I'm able to just turn that on and off, or set it to reference so that I can't accidentally destroy the mesh, which is something that may or may not have happened to me in a past life. Anyway, so again, I'm going to make this so that this is got a new attribute now called blend. And I'm just going to go to modify, add attribute, and if I put in a long name here of IK, actually I'll tell you what, we'll do it a slightly different way. I'm going to put in a space here, so a non-displayable enum, and I'm just going to delete that one just so I've got IK FK. I'm just going to hit add, and what that does, it just adds a little thing here which I can't kind of do anything to. It doesn't move or anything like that, but it just as a space between these translate, rotate and scale values and the actual blend I'm going to add. I'm going to add that as a float, which means that I can actually add that as, if I do that, just call it blend, and then have a minimum value of 0, a maximum value of 1, and add. And there we go. So now it's got an attribute here. So when it's on 0, we're going to be in FK mode. When it's at 1, we're going to be at IK mode. But because it's a float, if I do that, we get all the values in between. We get the actual blend of that. Okay, so now to kind of check how this works. So if I was to go to my node editor so I can see those, I'm just going to make this a bit smaller, because I'm going to jump between a couple of windows now. And I'm just going to open up a window under Windows called the Connection Editor. So this is where I can make the connection between my NURBS circle and these. You can see there that it's already got that blend there. And so I'm going to load in the hip. And you can see hip, and you've got the blender, which is this blender node here. If I was to show you that in the attribute editor, this blender here. So that's what it's going to control, that slide bar. So we can just go blend to blender. Grab the knee, reload right, and we've already got blend selected, so blender, Now you can see here, because all of these are set so color 1 is IK, that this blend can actually control all of them. If it wasn't, you would actually need a separate one, which doesn't make sense. You just wouldn't do it, so please don't. Anyway, so now that's done, what we should see with this particular attribute is when it's at 0, it's in FK mode, but when we push that up, that now controls the blend between IK and FK. Perfect, so I'm just going to delete the IK handle for the moment, and just select hierarchy on this. Select hierarchy and just put all the rotations back to 0. So now I know that all of those are ready. Okay, so technically I don't need to see the bind hip at the moment, so I'm just going to hide that. I will attach this to the rig as well, so maybe it's something that would move with the ankle, but all I've got here now are the IK and FKs, and I'm actually going to start with IK at the moment. So this is where we can actually now set up controls that are individual to our IK joint chain. So this is where I will just make a new IK handle. The reason why I deleted it is because I'd moved it, and just trying to put it back into the same place isn't easy. I don't think I actually know how to do that, to be honest. So it's just easier just to make it again. So leg underscore IK01, and just remember that end effector. I copy that, paste that, EFF. So now I've got a control here which will now move my IK knee. Okay, so now what I can do is actually set up a control that not only will control the movement of my joint chain, but will also rotate that bottom ankle joint. So again, I like using just the basic kind of nerves curves here. So I'm just going to kind of make a control at the bottom here, which again brought back the geometry so that I could make sure that I'm making this kind of the right shape. Going to just spend a bit of time designing this. Again, the design is completely up to you. I try and make them not all so flat, just so the animator can actually just select them a little bit easier. But that's really the only kind of tip I have for the design of these particular controls. Put them in a location that makes sense, but also make them so that they're easy to select. Okay, so something like that as well. Perfect. So now that's done, I'm just going to turn off my geometry because I know that this control works. I'm going to freeze my transformations and delete my history. Okay, so I'm just going to push D, which allows me to move my pivot point independently because I want this to control the ankle. So there we go. That has worked. So what I can do now is actually attach this so that it actually moves the ankle. So this being my first control, I'm going to put this as IK move. Actually, I'm just going to put this as IK. I'm trying to think of something eloquent to call it. I really can't at the moment. IK main CTRL01. There we go. That's an awful name. May as well just called it Bob. Anyway, so what I can do now is actually make it so that this moves the IK handle. Now, I don't want to parent it. So one way in which people would maybe approach this is they select the IK handle, then the control, and parent. Now, that will work. There's almost nothing wrong with that, apart from the fact that now, when I'm doing that, I'm rotating my IK handle as well, and you don't really want to do that. It doesn't deform the geometry in any way, it's just not a very clean connection. Okay, so I'm going to just, I mean, you can see those deforming the geometry because it wasn't in IK mode. Maybe I would switch to IK mode for that sense. So if I want to turn on the geometry, I can actually see that. There we go. But again, it's just not a clean connection. It's rotating things that it shouldn't. So I'm just going to unparent that. just Control Z to the point where that worked. I feel a save coming on. Let's go. So at this point now, what I can do is use something called a constraint, and if I pull this off, we've got a couple of constraints here, and what these allow us to do is actually pinpoint exactly which attributes we want to have for our controls to move around. So parent, if we go into the options for this, is something that constrains translate and rotate, so almost like a parent, only that it doesn't do scale. So I'm going to close that. Point is just translate, orient is rotation, scale is scale. Aim is an interesting one where you can actually have it so that the movement of one object actually will control the rotation of another one. This is great for character rigs where you've got you want to have a control that will actually rotate the eyes and you just want them to look at something. But here we've got the pull vector constraint, which we'll go through in a moment with the IK chain, so that we're able to pose and position the knee. This one really works well with IK handles. So again, with this particular case, you always select the control first. I'm going to select the IK handle, and in this case I'm just going to do a point constraint. In this case I can turn off maintain offset. I'll talk about what this is in a moment, but I'm just going to hit apply. And there we go. So now when I move this, it moves, but when I rotate it, and this is the important part, the IK handle isn't rotating, so that's good. Okay, again we froze the transformation, so if we ever want to put this back to its default pose, we can put that back there. Okay, but I want this to rotate for joint, and I'm going to do this with the orient constraint. Now I'm going to turn off maintain offset, and I'm going to show you why. And so again, control first, and we're just going to hit apply. If we were to put this into IK mode and see that, you can see what's happened there. So what's happened, because of the rotation of this control and the rotation of the joint being different, is actually had to change it around. This actually makes a bit more sense if you see the bind the bind joints as well. So if I go Shift H, you can see that's totally twisted those around. Okay. And you can see that the rotation of this joint is still set to 0. Sorry, if I actually select the joint, always helps. They've now gone off in this weird axis, and I'll just show you why this is. So if I go back to before I did that constraint, so if I show you what's happening here, you can see that in our IK knee, that although our rotation for this is actually 0, 0, 0, the joint orientation is different, and what it's doing is it's snapping it around to kind of a different orientation based on the world orientation. So this is just where it can be just a little bit difficult to try and get these to work. If you wanted to do this really quickly, you could just select maintain offset. So if I was to do that, I can go maintain offset, and when I do this now, apply, you can see rotational values have all kind of changed back to 0, but what you can see here is that we've got these offset values. Now if you're making a clean rig, you'd try and avoid these, but in this case I'm going to keep them. There are very cool ways in which you're able to make sure that you don't have any offset values, but in this case it's not going to be a problem. Okay, so just to make sure this works, we've got a control now, which when we move it, we'll move the leg and rotate the foot. And there we go. Okay, so now what we can do is add our pull vector constraint, and this one is just going to be one around about here, and it's just going to change the approximation of where the knee is facing. So I'm going to make this just in the front view, and I'm just going to use under curves the EP curve tool, and just going to set it to linear so I can draw just straight lines. I'm just going to hold X and just draw out this control. Now I draw out my controls when I do this so that the animator can look at it and see what that particular control is supposed to do. So I like arrows and things like that. But again, there's no right or wrong way to do this. It just depends on your preference, and maybe even the preference of the animator that you're working with as well. So again, I can go to modeling. I want to center my pivot, so use that one there. Delete my history, and freeze the transformations. There's no point freezing the transformations because I'm going to move this over to the knee. So I'm just going to snap that to the knee just by holding V to snap to the center of that joint and move that down. Control vertex, just add a bit of 3D-ness to that, and there we go. So again, now I can freeze the transformations on that, and then that is now a pole vector constraint. So I'm just going to call this IK_pole V underscore CTRL01. You could also call it knee control, but essentially what's going to happen here now, if I turn on my geometry, just to show you how this works, I'm going to select the control first, then the IK handle, constrain pole vector. And what that does now is it just means that now this control will twist the knee, and I can show you how that works. If we bring that there, now the knee will follow that control. Again, it will only work in IK mode, but I'm quite happy with how that's working now. So essentially that is now our joint chain for the IK done. So what I can do now is all of this, I can hide it, I can close it, bring back FK, and I'm going to keep these controls here for the moment, but what I'm going to do is just create a couple of controls in the side view, which will be rotational controls for these particular joints. I'm going to keep on my geometry as well so I can see those there. So if I was to go to, again, make a new control, again these may be rotational ones. I find these ones slightly harder to design, but I'm just going to have these as arrows basically. So I'm just going to push X to snap to the grid, and just draw out an arrow. Try and make it symmetrical as possible, Mike. There we go. So that's an arrow. So again, in my front view, I'm just going to turn off geometry for the moment, and I'm going to center the pivots. So center pivot, delete history, freeze transformations. And I'm just going to move this and snap it to there. Okay, so this one's going to be very simple. I'm going to make this a bit smaller. So this, actually I'm going to hide my IK handle. It's not actually doing anything in this scene at the moment, and I don't need to work on it again. And I'm just going to snap my pivot point to that vertex. Okay, and then duplicate that to the knee, and then actually on that side I'm actually going to bring that round so that is just there. Just make that 180, and then I'm going to do one for the ankle as well. So where's the ankle joint? We will do that as a, again we'll duplicate that, and V. Now this one's a bit trickier. I'm going to turn on my geometry just because I want to be able to see that at all times. So I'm going to move that just there. Perfect. So I've got this one here, which will be for the hip, the knee, and the ankle. Okay, so again, this one is FK underscore hip underscore CTRL01. I'm just going to copy this name because I'm just going to rename that one knee, that one ankle. Perfect. Okay, so lots of nice controls here at the moment. So again, just for the moment, these IK ones I can hide, don't need them. They're just in the way at the moment. So just making sure I'm in FK mode. So just going to rotate the knee. I'm not in FK mode, so just make sure I set that to FK. So I can see that now the FK joint actually moves the knee. And because these are all rotationally based, all I have to do is make sure that they're all just orient constraints. So again, this is a slightly interesting way of doing this. I'm going to go to constrain orient, make sure maintain offsets on so I don't start to get some weird transformations, and again, may as well turn off the geometry for the moment. And again, just make sure I've frozen these transformations, I've rescaled some of these and everything. Okay, so now control, joint, apply, control, joint, apply, control, joint, apply. There we go. So now this one, now will move everything. This one will move the knee, this one will move just the ankle. If I saw the ankle there, I can see that if I check that. Now I want these controls to move down the chain, and this is incredibly simple to make. If you think of the joints being a parenting system, you can do the same with the controls, just daisy chain it down. So I select them in order. Actually, so yeah, children first, so it's in reverse order. And then just push parent, and then parent again. So now that one controls all of them, that one controls that one, and that one controls that one. So now the way this works, I can move that down and move that like that. Awesome. Okay, so we've actually got all our controls now actually working. There may be one more control that I add right at the end, but I'll show you how to do that, which will be maybe just something so we can wiggle the toes. But one thing I'm going to do, now I'm finished with my IK and FK hip, I can hide that, and now I can bring back the bind hip, because that's what I'm working with now. So now I've got to a stage where I've got all my controls back, and I've got IK, which at the moment doesn't move it, but I can position that. But with this control here, if it was to switch between that, it will now switch between the two. Now you can see there a slight roll of the ankle, and that's just because of the way in which the blend's working at the moment. It's also just to do with the pole vector constraint, just make sure it's not too close, and then that blend is going to work just absolutely fine. There you go. So again, I'm just going to put that back to just the way it was, because what we want now is for these controls to switch. So as much as it's great to be able to kind of, when we're in FK mode, to be able to see the controls, we actually probably want them to go away if we're in IK mode. It looks just a little bit cluttered. This control we actually want to stay at all times and move with the bind. So again, really simple to do this. I'm going to have this so that it moves with the knee. So this was the IK FK CTRL01. I'm just going to move this down with my other controls. And you select the child first, and then I'm going to select the bind knee and just push parent. So now if I am in any particular mode, you can see there I'm in FK mode. When I move it, it will move, and then when if I was to make the blend from IK to FK, sorry, other way around, FK to IK, it now moves with it. So no matter what happens, we now always have this IK FK always following whichever mode we're in. And don't worry about the fact that it's added these, because we're never moving this control. Okay, so we can actually just lock and hide those. Right click, it's been cut off a bit by my screen, but you can see they're just lock and hide selected if you right click on those. So now I've only got that blend there. Okay, so the point being that this is going to drive the visibility of these, and you can do this under animation, key, and there's one here just called set driven key, and just hit set. So the way this works is that we bring in a driver and a driven. So the driven will be the actual controls visibility, and the driver will be this. So we're going to bring that in, and it's the blend option. So we're in IK mode at the moment, where it's 1. So I'm going to be looking at the visibility of these two controls. So I'm going to close that down because I need my attribute editor. So Control A to bring that up. And you just do this on the shape node. So that's what you select. And load driven. Now I can't see all the attributes that I need, so I can just go to show non-keyable attributes under the options. Just show it for all of them, and it's kind of annoying, but we can get back to that blend there. And then just under IK pull vector constraint, there will be something, I always find it eventually, there we go, LOD visibility, so that's what I'm going to select. So what I'm going to do is key this because it's correct. I'm also going to do this for my shape for the bottom part of the foot. Load driven, LOD visibility, again making sure that you've got the shape selected. So those are keyed. Now we're going to switch this to FK mode, so this being 0, and now we'll turn those off. So if we were to go to this, and actually I'll do it on this one first because it's already selected. Just go to Object Display, and this LOD visibility, remembering that you're on the shape node because there is one under display on the actual main node. You have to do it on the shape node, and this will make sense a bit more in a moment when I show you this on the FK. But I'm going to turn that off and then key again. This one, select, load driven, LOD visibility, and just make sure you turn it off as well, and key. So just going to minimize that just so you can see what's happened. So when I'm in IK mode, those will turn on, FK mode, they turn off. Simple as that. So now the same with these. Now the reason why I can't use visibility with these, I'm just going to open up my attribute editor again. If I was to do this on the main node, visibility, it turns them all off because they're parented. It's a parenting system. Okay. And again, if I'm on this one and visibility, I can do it with just that one, again on the shape node, but I mean you could if you wanted to, you just have to find that visibility attribute here. I just find it easier to find the LOD visibility, to be honest. So anyway, so the way in which this works is that now I need to make sure that I'm in FK mode, which I am, which means the visibility of these will all be on. So it does mean go to the shape node, you select the node, you load it, you select it, key it, select it, load driven, click it and key, select it, load driven and key. So now switching back to, actually I'll just move that out of the way, back to IK mode, when these need to turn off, and it's just the same thing again, but the step here being slightly different, where we select it, so select the shape node, load driven, LOD visibility, and just make sure we turn it off. That always helps. I do get sometimes a bit confused with that. I don't select them and it just gives me like awkward errors, and you just spend ages trying to do that. So again, just make sure you keyed that. It doesn't matter if you already had done because it will just overwrite it. So then select load driven, LOD visibility, off, key, select load driven, and just turn that off and key. So all going well, what we've got here now, if when we select here, when we blend between these two, when we go down to 0, go back down to 0, is that it will switch from one set of controls to the other. Okay, so we can hide, actually we won't hide that yet, I'm going to work on that a little bit more. But we've got our bind, we've got this control here, which allows us to do the switch. We've got our IKFK controls, which we can then switch between to get the different positions. So that's working perfectly now. Okay, so just last couple of steps with this is that I'm going to add a control just for the movement of the toes. So again, I like just, will I do a duplicate of that? I won't, only because I'll duplicate everything else. So I'm just going to create another control here. And again, this is one that's going to exist outside of the IKFK chain because I want it to work regardless of which chain I'm in. So again, I'm just going to make this actually maybe quite a bit bigger and push this up here. And I'm going to turn off my geometry DV and snap that to there. So what's going to happen is that this will move. So the way in which is kind of best to do this is I'm going to select this control, which I'm just going to rename toes underscore CTRL01, and I'm going to parent it to the bind ankle. Okay, so like that, so that when the ankle moves, this always moves. Okay, so it's always moving down, and then within this, freeze the transformations. There we go. So now what we can do is select this, go to constraints, and then orient constraint, remember with maintain offset, where we can select that one, and this one, and apply. Okay, so then we can look at this and see exactly how this works. So now this control will move the toes like that. I've got this control which will be able to move that. And it doesn't matter now if I switch to FK mode and put that to 0, because it's going to switch to regardless. And even if that has a rotation in it like that, that rotation will stay when I switch because it's not dependent on the switch itself. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to put this back to 0, because as I said, with this now set up with all the controls and everything we need, it's just a bit of kind of cleanup and maintenance that kind of really helps with stuff like this. And again, if I hide the bind chain, I'm going to hide these controls, so I just want to make sure I don't. And you don't have LOD visibility on these, but you can just change the draw style to none. So unfortunately you have to do this joint for joint, so only do this once you're finished with your joint chain. And none there as well. So now I've got a clean rig. I like to colour these, so any that are going to be always there, I go to the drawing override and I just make them yellow. Same there, yellow. Okay, so IK, I'm going to go with something like red. And then when it changes to FK, just change that rotation back to 0. All these are going to go green, so we know 100% exactly what node, what workflow we're in. It's a nice luminous green. Cool, there we go. One thing you can do as well, actually, if I enable override, is just change this to RGB and then just do it that way. It's a little bit quicker than having to go through the index colors. There we go. Okay, so just as a quick recap for this, so we've now got our FK controls, which enable us to move these joints exactly how we want them to. But then we've got a control here which will enable us to move the toes. And if we push the 1 key on the blend to switch it to IK mode, we can now move these, rotate, and again move the ankle, move the knee, again all confused with joints now, to change that. Okay, so I hope you found that interesting. That was again just a simple overview of how you would actually approach, it's only one way of approaching the IK-FK blend, but I think it's one of the ones that's the easiest, and one that obviously, with one thing about character rigging is that people really try to avoid coding where possible and using the nodes built within Maya to actually kind of make this advanced functionality. Again, if you are used to coding and do want to do it that way, there are lots of options that you can start to do. The same thing with some lines of code. It does mean you have to implement it at different steps, but again, very fun and very flexible way of working. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting, and hopefully maybe you get a couple more tutorials from me in the future. Take care.